Okay, so I am in the middle of building out an Android app for the first time. I'm about a day into this and I'm learning a couple of interesting things with Android. Last night I was working on this registration activity. My original attempt to get this going was to use Volley, and that works really good for sending things when the request and the response are both JSON. However, I ran into a problem, and the problem is that I have an API endpoint, and that endpoint here, let me pull this up here, which is user registration. At the moment, what it is, so I'm working on the Deal Perch project here. This is interfacing with a Spring Boot REST API. I've got documentation. It's generated using Spring REST docs, in case anyone's wondering here. And what's nice about REST docs, just as a quick overview, is that you can create documentation and it's driven by the unit tests themselves. And so in this case here, we send up an HTTP post. These are the parameters you'd send in to register an account on Deal Perch. And then here is the response coming out. Now you'll notice right here is that we're supplying up some JSON as part of our HTTP request body, and the service is returning with a 200 OK and no content in here. I mean, technically I could probably do like a 204 no content, or even like a 202 accepted would be a good response for here. But in this case here, we send a 200 OK. It's a really quick response back. We schedule typical like registration, activation email sent out to someone welcoming them. But in this case here, on the Android side of things, it is expecting with a JSON object request that it gets a JSON object out. And in this case here, when we run this registration method here, rather than it hitting the response OK, which is honestly what I expected given that I got a 200 type of response, I was like, oh yeah, of course, that's just gonna go into this on response side of things. Instead, what I got was this popped into the on error response method, which was totally unexpected, and it actually crashed the app when I was playing with this. So then I was like, okay, well maybe I'll dive into this JSON object request, and long story short, there wasn't a convenient way to handle when the response was not JSON. And so then I was like, okay, well, I'll create a string object request. And that sounded like a good one. So I'm like, okay, then I'll serialize my request object right here, which is just a JSON object. And we put all the parameters in. And I was like, I'll just, toString that and get a string that I would post up. But once again, there is no way to supply a request body in there without overriding the base string request method. So all this is to say, I'm totally ditching Volley, and now I am moving forward with Retrofit. So Retrofit is another HTTP client library. It's actually really cool. So far I'm pretty impressed with it. It's heavily annotation driven, so you like a at post annotation, you pass in the path for it. There's other like parameters you can throw in there too, for like path and things like that. You can supply headers, which was something that was not really intuitive to manipulate with Volley. So far so good. I haven't actually wired this up to test this. And then now what I'm currently researching is how I'm going to supply an authorization header. So for example, this get on a user profile endpoint, if I pull that up here, which is the next endpoint that I'm working on, that one is going to need, I'm not showing it in here because we're stripping authorization headers as part of our tests, but this needs a authorization header, which would be like a bearer token being supplied up. So that would conceptually what would be supplied if we were doing this in like Postman is we'd have like authorization : bearer, and then our secret access, I guess here, secret.access.token goes here. And it's actually a JWT token, which has the header, the body, and then the signature stuff. inside of its structure, and then like all base64 encoded and whatnot. But these headers are constructed at compile time, and so doing something where we have this like dynamic bearer token, which is going to be coming from my session manager. So I put together this little, make this a little bit smaller here. So I created the session manager here. It's not currently in use. I'm trying to follow some of the best practices I've learned while working on this, but Session Manager is just using shared preferences. It's kind of like a global library thing. We have some basic keys in here, so user access token, and I'm just storing these kind of prefixed in the shared Android preferences area, prefixing kind of like where it's at in the app, and then what the specific thing is. That way it's like alphabetically sortable. I'm not 100% sure on how that will look when it's stored, since again this is my first time building an Android app. But anyways, these are the keys in here, and then I am supplying out or kind of interfacing with that. So we'll have just a couple of public methods in here, so you can save an access token, you can save the refresh token, save an access token expiration, and the refresh token expiration. And then I'm just storing these as longs. The concept here is that this is just going to store the Linux epoch, and then we can convert that to and from a date. I didn't want to do anything fancy with storage, and it looks like anyways the methods that are available are like pretty limited. You can just put some primitive objects in here, put string, int, long, float, boolean. That's really it. And so from that standpoint, I think it makes the most sense to stuff all of this in this manager, or in this manner here, just kind of doing a big long chain. Doesn't look like it throws any kind of exceptions, which is nice. So somehow all of that is internalized right here. And then on the getter side of things, I am leveraging the optional class. String was very simple, which was nice. So I'm just going to return an optional of nullable here. We'll get the string, and if there's no string stored here, it returns null, so that gives us an empty optional. That's cool. The longs was a little bit funky. Oh, I just realized. Yeah, so then I've got this long, so I'm checking to see if the value of, so I'm casting this primitive long up into its object version here. My default value, I'm giving this a 0L. This is always going to be in Linux epoch. It's always going to be a non-zero number. So zero number long here is my default that we're storing if we don't get anything out. And if it's equal to that, then if the value is 0L, oh, hey, look at that. There we go. Actually, you know what we should probably do here? Let me fix that. That's a bug. Okay, and we'll be right there. Okay, so if our value is not equal to the default, then we're going to return that output. Otherwise, we will return an empty optional. So that's my session manager. I don't know. We'll see if this works, but that's my current thought process on how to store some of the basic stuff for authentication. I'm going to need to intercept it like regularly, and so because I need to intercept that in the app, this just feels like a nice little simple interface, and this could then be refactored later to use, I don't know, something like, it looks like Room is another library that's available on Android, and so I will be using that. So anyways, this at least Session Manager final class we got here can be refactored out. I could certainly make this implement an interface, but so far it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, so I think next, so anyways, going full circle here. Headers. So on my APIs, I've got a couple of endpoints that require authorization, so most of them do. Registration doesn't, obviously. Forgot passwords, not going to require that. That's not documented in here. We'll have to add that. And then a couple of other spots. So getting a profile is going to need authentication. Searching profiles by name, I don't think that requires authentication. Updating your profile does. Adding a profile image, so this is like, throwing an avatar of yourself in here. Deleting your images, and then fetching profile images. All of those require authentication. And then the next API pretty much everything in here requires authentication. Not entirely true, but yeah, so we've got like all these finds. So creating a find, that's gonna that's always associated with your account. We do have public lists in here, and none of those are going to require authentication. But anyways, long story short, I've got a number of APIs I need to implement for this client code. But this custom header, I think I can use this, and then I'm going to wire in. I found this blog article. Let me find that here real quick. Yeah, there we go. I don't know how current this is, but it looks pretty solid. They've got both the Retrofit 1.2 and or 1.9 and 2.0. What's cool about that is they've got this request interceptor, so Retrofit layers on top all that fancy annotation goodness. This is written in Kotlin, so I'll have to just do a bit of translation at the Java side of things. But we want to intercept requests, and what I want to do is I think I only want to intercept requests that have that authorization, my custom, what do I call that? X authorized bearer header. So if it has this header and it corresponds to the bearer side of things, then I'm going to want to fetch the access token and then add that into the request. And then I'm thinking should be a little bit more magic that needs to happen here, because like the whole thing with OAuth and access tokens is they expire after a while. And so some additional magic's gonna need to happen, which is checking the access token expiration, and probably intermittently checking and refreshing those, or at least doing that when the app is first started, just to keep things stable. So I'll have to think through that a little bit more. There's always that like complexity with the front end code when you have the OAuth 2 side of things working. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, that's where it's at here. I'll post an update. I'm gonna pause this here, and then I'm gonna poke at trying to get this dynamic authorization header override. I guess I can call this interceptor. This class here, and then it's gonna do the intercepting of request decorated with this header, and it'll smush in that header on the fly. That's my trick. I haven't seen anything better on the internet, so in the absence of something better, that's what we're gonna do. We'll see how it goes.